it was not okay to have short socks on a little girl from around 3 years old. 3 years old is kind of when a girl is supposed to be completely modest. She can't be alone with a boy. It's horrifying to think of it. When I realized what it meant, I'm like, wow, because she's a sexual being at 3 years old. This is something called yichud, which is essentially being alone together.
Like you as the babysitter and the 9-year-old boy?
We couldn't be alone in the house because something might happen. Now, when I was in 8th grade, I didn't know what that meant. There is no sex ed, so I didn't even know that sex existed. In fact, when I was in 11th grade and I had been reading some books that were not approved of and had sex scenes, I asked my mother, is this something that Jews also do when they get married, or is this just what non-Jews do? And she was like, of course, this is what a husband and wife does. Up until I was around 15, I thought that bride and groom standing under the chuppah, God puts a baby. Yichud is you can't be alone together. So if you have the door unlocked and someone else knows that the door is unlocked, that means that anyone can come in at any point and can surprise you. So you're not going to engage in that act because you know that someone might come in at any point. It's horrifying, right? To think of leaving the only thing you've ever known and then trying to make a new life out there.
Hey, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening on the podcast app and you'd like to see our faces, please go over to YouTube at Cults to Consciousness. It's so awesome when you guys can interact with the posts. Honestly, it means so much to us. It means so much to the guests. They're real people. They read the comments. It really brightens their day when you leave those words of encouragement for them. It boosts the algorithm. Of course, doing all the YouTube things by liking and subscribing also really helps the video. Our goal is just to get the most eyes on these so we can spread awareness, spread compassion, and let people know about what's going on in these different groups from our guest perspective. So today's guest, I was very happy to be connected with them. They grew up in an Ultra Orthodox sect that was Haredi. We're going to be zooming in on their experience in these all-girls schools and the way that those were damaging to them and their experience. We're going to be talking about what it was like to try and double down by going to Israel and learning more about the faith and then ultimately leaving and getting a PhD. So we're so looking forward to talking to them. Thank you so much for joining us, Dainy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have been connected with you. And I think this is an important topic because we haven't really zoomed in on what it's like being raised in the Ultra Orthodox within these specific schools. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing your experience. And also something that I failed to mention in the intro is that you were advocating for these kids and there was a little bit of a backlash that happened and words were twisted. And we're going to get into kind of the aftermath of what can happen when you do step up and become an advocate, because it's not always pretty and it's not always easy. And so actually I would say it's never easy. And
Right.
So I'm looking forward to that experience as well. All that to say, I really appreciate you being willing to come on and share today because I know it can be difficult.
Yeah. I mean, it's a whole journey from the beginning to end. There's never a part of it that's not difficult.
Well, let's talk about your childhood then. Give the audience an idea, kind of a snapshot of where you were raised, maybe your family dynamic, and kind of what your life looked like as far as your expectations, the rules you were supposed to follow, and so forth.
So I grew up in a Haredi community, and the distinction here in Ultra Orthodoxy is that Hasidic is not the same as Haredi. Hasidic is kind of a subset of Haredi. There are other subsets. I didn't belong to any particular subset of Haredi. We were just kind of middle of the road, Ultra Orthodox. Actually, it was about 6th grade when I started calling my family mixed up because we had some Hasidic customs and we spoke with a somewhat Hasidic accent, but we were not actually Hasidic.
Okay.
So I grew up in Brooklyn, not in Williamsburg, which is most often associated with Hasidic Brooklyn, but in Borough Park. I have 8 siblings. There are 3 above me and 5 under me, 5 boys and 3 other girls. So I went to Beis Yaakov schools, and Beis Yaakov is a generic name for an Orthodox girls' school. I went to the one that was, its claim to fame is that it was founded by a student of Sarah Schneer, and Sarah Schneer is the woman who founded the Beis Yaakov movement in Poland in the 1920s. So her student came to America and brought that movement over here. That's not the only story. As with any narrative, there are various people who will tell the story as beginning or continuing at different points. But this is kind of its claim to fame. It's the biggest school. There are about 200 girls in every grade. That's in the high school, actually. So in the elementary school, it's even bigger than that. It's kind of a community school. Girls come in from Midwood in Brooklyn, Flatbush, Bensonhurst, Kensington. These are all neighborhoods in Brooklyn. And so if you don't know Brooklyn, that's fine. But the idea is basically that there are girls coming from all over Brooklyn to these schools. It is a girls' school. Everything is gender segregated. The boys go to their own yeshivas. We call those yeshivas. And I know that modern Orthodoxy calls girls' schools yeshivas also, sometimes. But to me, yeshiva is definitely a boys' space. A yeshiva comes with a lot of expectations around what it is actually. And the biggest thing, the difference for me when I say yeshiva is that's where they study Talmud, and girls are not allowed to study Talmud.
Oh.
So again, that varies. There are differences. I had a friend who did study Talmud in high school, but she was Lubavitch. That's a whole different, it's a different segment. So in these schools, I mean, we're gender segregated from nursery, from around 3 years old. Essentially, what I realized afterwards, looking back on it, is that the main thing that you're learning is not even waiting until high school, but from the beginning, you're learning how to be a good Jewish wife and mother, to raise children who are going to be good Jews.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, at one point when I had left, my mother said to me, because of my life choices, she is a failure, because her entire purpose in life is to raise observant Jewish children. And so she failed.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, my response to her then was, that's something you have to deal with. That's not on me. I mean,
Yeah.
I was 27 at the time. So, I'm allowed to make my own choices.
Yeah.
So in the girls' school, we are essentially being raised that way. One interesting thing about the difference between boys and girls' schools and the kind of reverse sexism is that because girls are not allowed to learn Talmud, they do spend more time learning certain books of the Torah, the Bible, that the boys don't. The boys go from the first 5 books, the Pentateuch. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I never do, because it's not a word that we used growing up, but we call that chumash. So the boys go straight from that, and in about, depending on which yeshiva they're in, 3rd grade or 5th grade, they will start studying Mishnah, which is the earlier part of the Talmud. And then in around 7th grade or 8th grade, they'll move on to Gemara, which is the part of the Talmud that was written a bit later. So they don't actually study prophets or hagiographa. Nevi'im and Ksuvim is what we called it. But the girls do. They do study that. Beginning in 4th grade, we were studying prophets. And then in high school, we went on to study Proverbs and some things like that. So there is that little bit that we get a little bit more of that biblical knowledge, whereas the boys are getting it only from Talmud. Whenever the Talmud happens to cite one of these books, they'll get that. And the other thing is the secular education. The other sort of reverse sexism thing that happens is that girls get a better secular education than boys, because boys have an obligation to study Torah, which means that any moment that they're not spending studying Torah is a waste of time. And this is one of the big differences also in the Hasidic and non-Hasidic yeshivas. So you had on Beatrice Weber, who worked at Yafed. Yafed is doing fantastic, amazing work, specifically for Hasidic boys yeshivas. So as someone who was raised in a non-Hasidic but Haredi girls' school, and my brothers went to a non-Hasidic Haredi yeshiva, there are big differences. But one thing that's the same is that it's considered a waste of time to be studying or doing or reading anything other than studying Torah, which is also, it was an interesting thing that once I was doing my PhD, like I always had this in the back of my head. Like I knew this was a fact that was just like, of course, but actually studying it and putting it into kind of a systematic overview and analysis, there are very few books for teenage boys. There are very few novels and things for teenage boys. There are a lot for teenage girls, because the teenage boys are not supposed to be reading these things. Of course, the books for teenage girls, I had this whole thing when I was kind of like, do I categorize this as a young adult book or is it women's fiction? because a book that's about marriage can be intended to be read by 16 and 17-year-old girls. And there's no idea about, well, they're not going to be able to relate to this life of having a husband and babies because, well, they'll be there in a couple of years. So that's kind of how that goes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the boys yeshivas, the Haredi boys yeshivas, the non-Hasidic ones, the big difference there is that they do sometimes attempt to follow the government standards. And so they'll take the standardized test. They will learn English, grammar, literature, science, math, history, but it is a very limited amount of time. It's at most 2 hours out of the day. By the time they're in 8th grade, their day starts at 7 a.m. and they go until 9 p.m. And then it gets a little bit later. Once they get to high school, it can go until 10. There is a break in between. They go back for nighttime study. So there's in the afternoon,
Wow.
like immediately after lunch. You know, when after lunch is when you want to kind of take a nap?
Yeah.
That's when they had their 2 hours of secular studies. And
When
the
you're
stories
sleepy.
I heard. Yeah, because it doesn't matter. Jumping ahead again, but the way I got that was I was always an academic person. I was always very curious intellectually. You know, my family was a very intellectual reading family. One of the things that I find kind of sad is that my mother almost got a PhD. Because, first of all, when she was growing up, the community did not look the way it does. The Hasidic community didn't undergo as many changes in terms of becoming stricter, but the non-Hasidic Haredi community became extremely strict over the last 40 years or so. So when my parents were growing up in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot less strictness. My mother went to the movies, and that's an absolute no-no. We could not go to the movies. It was the worst thing you could do. Well, one of the worst. And whenever my mother would mention that, she would say, well, it was a different time. And I was always kind of skeptical of that because she told us the story about how she and her friends went to the movies once to see a horror movie. Not that they like horror movies, but the actor that was in it, they liked him. So they went to ogle the actor and ended up covering their eyes half the time because they were so scared. And I'm like, excuse me, what? I'm not supposed to look at boys. I'm not supposed to feel any of that, which is, that gets into a whole different story altogether. But it was a different time. And my mother has a master's in education, and she started doing a PhD at Columbia University in ancient Middle Eastern history.
Wow.
She started writing her dissertation. She once showed me pages of it that were tucked away in the basement, you know, on the kind of old perforated sheets. She stopped in the middle of her dissertation. And I always thought that she stopped because she had kids and couldn't balance the two and always intended to go back. And recently I heard from a family member that they were told that the reason she didn't finish it was because her funding ran out. So I'm not entirely sure what the story is, but that's also kind of a symptom of the community as a whole, where there are different narratives about the very recent past. Which of those is true is kind of hard to ascertain. There's actually a great book called Changing the Immutable by Mark Shapiro. It's an academic book, but it's really, really great. And he goes through that and talks about how the Haredi rhetoric is the Torah never changes. This is how it has been since Moses at Sinai, Moshe Sinai. This is how it has always been. Haredi Judaism is the one true form of Judaism, and we are just continuing a long and proud tradition. That is not true. It is absolutely untrue. Going back even 200 years, there's a lot of this attempt to say what we're doing is recreating European Orthodox Judaism. And it's not. Some of the things that happen it's not actually a direct continuation. Things have changed, even to the point where one of the questions driving my research when I was writing my dissertation was, how did we get from my parents' generation in the 60s and 70s, right, when they were kids, to when I was growing up in the 90s, born in the late 80s, right? So when I was growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s, how is there such a huge difference in a matter of, 20, 30 years? From one generation to the next, how is there such a huge difference? My answer, and the reason that I was working on children's books, well, one of the reasons I was working on children's books was it's in the children. It's what you give to the children. You give the children this ideology of, for example, okay, this is like a really silly example, right? But when I was a kid, it was perfectly fine for little girls up to the age of 5, 7 to wear bobby socks, right? Ankle socks. By the time my younger siblings, my youngest sister is 12 years younger than me. So whole different generation that she's part of. But then also, the younger kids on the block and the nieces and nephews, by the time they were growing up, it was not okay to have short socks on a little girl from around 3 years old. And 3 years old is kind of when a girl is supposed to be completely modest, everything. She can't be alone with a boy. It's horrifying to think of it. When I realized what it meant, I'm like, wow, because she's a sexual being at 3 years old. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
For boys, it's 9.
Wow. I want to talk about your perspectives as a child. So you're seeing these things change, you're seeing the rules tighten. And as a young person, how did you feel noticing these things? Did you understand at what age did you understand the implications of we're sexualizing this child?
I think I was in denial for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back, around 10th grade was when I stopped believing. I didn't believe by the time I was in 10th grade. But it's horrifying, right? To think of leaving the only thing you've ever known and then trying to make a new life out there, or letting go of it is really hard. And I lied to myself quite a lot. And in retrospect, I can own that, right? I lied to myself. I babysat starting from when I was in 8th grade or so. I would babysit for the neighbors, for my cousins. And that, I think, was when I started realizing that, because if I was babysitting a boy who was 9 years old, we had to leave the door unlocked and we had to make sure that a neighbor knew that the door was unlocked.
What do you mean?
So this is something called yichud, which is essentially being alone together.
Like you as the babysitter and the 9-year-old boy?
Yeah. We couldn't be alone in the house because something might happen. Now, when I was in 8th grade, I didn't know what that meant. There is no sex ed, so I didn't even know that sex existed. In fact, when I was in 11th grade, and I had been reading some books that were not approved of and had sex scenes, I asked my mother, is this something that Jews also do when they get married, or is this just what non-Jews do? And she was like, of course. This is what a husband and wife does.
Oh, interesting.
And I was like, how am I supposed to know? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Up until I was around 15, I thought that bride and groom standing under the chuppah, God puts a baby. And chuppah is wedding canopy. But it was probably around 10th grade that I was kind of like, who exactly are you suspecting of being able to do something wrong? Do you think the 9-year-old boy is going to try and do something to me? Do you think that I am going to?
Yeah. Wow.
But
okay.
Going back to the yichud thing, so yichud is you can't be alone together. So if you have the door open, if you have the door unlocked and someone else knows that the door is unlocked, that means that anyone can come in at any point and can surprise you. So you're not going to engage in that act because you know that someone might come in at any point.
That's why you're not going to engage in the act.
Yeah.
You're not going to engage in pedophilia because you know the door's open. Like, hold on. There's so much to unpack here because like you were just saying, where are they placing the responsibility?
Right.
On the 9-year-old boy or on the adult woman? Because from what I understand, and I want to hear from your perspective, are they saying that if anything sexual were to happen between a boy and a girl, it's always the girl's fault? Is that why she needs to be modest and covered up?
In terms of modesty and covering up, yes. But in terms of being left alone together, no. We had a class where we learned the laws of yichud in 12th grade because, we would be going out into the world, we would be in offices, and we have to know what to do if you're working with men.
Okay.
Those laws are intricate. There's this concept of Baila Ba'ir, which is Baila, Ba'ala, Ba'ir. Her husband is in the city. So if a woman is alone with a man who is not her husband, but her husband is in the city and the door is open, it's okay. But if her husband is not in the city, even if the door is open, it's not okay.
Okay.
So another aspect of this is this law that if there's one man and 30 or whatever number women in a room alone together, that's okay. But if there's one woman and 30 men, that's not okay. So this is where it gets actually a little bit, I think this is somewhat different from the sort of dominant Christian idea of it's the woman's fault all the time. There's definitely that is there, right? You are causing a man to sin if you expose parts of your body, or if you sing, or if you walk with your hips swaying, you are causing a man to have lustful thoughts. But in this case, it's more that men are animals. And like literally that was said to us. Men are animals. They have to work really hard to overcome their animalistic drive. And so if you have a whole group of men alone with one woman, they're not going to be able to control themselves. But if you have one man and a whole bunch of women, then the man will be able, not necessarily will be able to control himself. The women will be able to overpower him, I think. I don't know. I don't remember that exactly. So just kind of caveat over here, I might be getting some details wrong. But it's that kind of thing. And I mean, it can't always be the woman's fault because a girl, when she's 3 years old, is not allowed to be alone with a man.
Yeah.
So no one's saying that 3-year-old girl has any agency. It's about the man acting on his animalistic desires. For a 3-year-old.
Yeah, there are some issues here. I want to hear your thoughts because you are obviously in this community and you can see what's going on around you. I feel like with those rules, along with those implications of a 3-year-old needs to be modest, we don't want her to be too tempting, along with the idea that men are considered animals, I feel like that is ripe for abuse because you're putting the idea into people's minds that they should be attracted to a child, that they shouldn't be able to control themselves. And it creates so many weird distortions. And so I feel like when you hyper sexualize something, or when you're trying to eliminate sex, you end up hyper sexualizing children and making men seem overstimulated in a way that actually causes them to act on these behaviors. At least that's what I've noticed through these interviews. So did you feel like that was the case in your community, or did you notice any of that happening?
Yeah, very much so, personally. So I currently am on the asexuality spectrum, but it took me a long time where I was wondering, am I asexual or am I traumatized? Because from the age of around 9, not that I knew what it was at the time, but eventually when I was able to put words to it, I thought of myself as an over-sexualized person. I was like, I can't help it. I'm just sensual. One of the reasons for that is I was molested by my oldest brother. I was 9, he was 13. So another thing that's different about what the boys study is that the Talmud has lots of laws about sex. And the boys, they speak candidly about the changes happening to their body when they're going through puberty. Girls, private, not at all. We're not learning Talmud, so we don't know any of that. But so he was 13. I attempted to speak to him about this years later, but I never got an answer, and I don't talk to him anymore. My take on it is that he was experimenting. Clothes were on the whole time. So clothes never came off, which is another reason why it took me so long to recognize and be able to say, yes, that was molesting. Because I was like, he didn't. No clothes were taken off, Mm-hmm. He would take me into his bedroom. We would close the door. He would lie down on the floor, and I would lie down on top of him. And then he would say body heat. And he was attempting to kiss. He clearly didn't know what it was, because we would basically both open our mouths and kind of, one mouth, another mouth, side to side, kind of like that. And we called it kissing. Then he told me that it was because, no one else would understand this. So obviously, right, we have to keep it a secret.
Yeah.
My take on it is that he didn't have any recourse. There were boys who did hang out with girls. There were girls who hung out with boys. That did happen. But he was somewhere on the line in between good boy and bad boy. And so he didn't have access to girls. He did have access to his younger sister. And it was not my older sister because she was old enough to know.
Yeah.
My older sister is 2 years younger than him. So she would have been 11. And she also was a much stronger personality than I was. I was desperate for love and attention, which is a whole separate story. I mean, there were 9 of us eventually. At that point, there weren't. But, eventually there were 9 of us. How much attention is each child getting? Not much. Interestingly, when I was 21 or something like that, I had a really bad UTI. We didn't know it was a UTI, and I ended up going to the emergency room, and my mother was there with me. When we got back after everything had been taken care of, my father joked, if you really want mommy's attention, you don't have to do some things like that. You don't have to scare us like that.
Whoa.
I rolled my eyes at him at that point, but yeah, we didn't get attention, right? Like, let's acknowledge it. We didn't all get attention. But yeah, so I kind of thought it was something special. I started a diary in 3rd grade, and I kept it up through high school and seminary the year after high school. I threw them all out at one point because I was disgusted with myself. And I really regret that because, like, wow, what a treasure trove that would be. But I vividly remember the diary entry where I said, I just want to go to his room and kiss him. Nobody understands it. Nobody gets it. Because I was really sad one night, and that's what I wrote, which is horrifying.
Yeah.
But it's not even just that, because that's a big thing, right? Like, my 13-year-old brother molested me when I was 9 years old, right? Straight up. But there were other little things that happened. My other older brother, who's 2 years older than me, at one point, I don't know exactly what the story was, but it was like Friday night, everyone was at the Shabbos table. In Shabbat, we say it's Shabbos. It's just a difference in pronunciation, but it's the same thing. And for some reason, his linen had not been put on his bed. So he's a boy. He doesn't do linen. I was sent to put the linen on his bed, and he was down there with me. And when I leaned over to put the corner of the sheet, the fitted sheet, onto the mattress, he slapped my ass. And I turned around and was like, what are you doing? And I was around 15, so he was 17 at this point.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely old enough to know better.
Uh-huh.
But again, you can see why that kind of makes me think I am just inherently sexual and there's nothing I can do about it. And there was another incident, but I'll kind of segue from that into this idea that as a girl, you're just inherently sexual.
Mm-hmm.
There's a story that's in the Talmud. I'm not sure exactly how it appears because, once again, I didn't see it in the text. This is just how it was told to us. So it could appear differently in the Talmud. But there's the story of a rabbi's daughter who was so beautiful that men would look at her, no matter what she did, wherever she went, men would look at her, and she was devastated that she was causing men to sin. So she prayed to God and said, take away my looks. I don't want this. I don't want to be causing men to sin. And then there was a fire, and she was in it, and her face was horribly disfigured. And she said, thank you, God.
Oh.
That is what we were raised on.
Oh my gosh. That's...
Yeah.
Wow. That's really extreme.
It's rough.
So I can imagine that with those messages and the way that you were being overly sexualized, even by your own family members, I would imagine that would make you feel that you wanted to be invisible, that you just wanted to disappear. How were you feeling as a teenager, an adolescent, or even a child?
I did. I mean, that's exactly it. You got it right. I wanted to be invisible. I wanted to disappear. I overcompensated by being extremely outgoing with my friends, to the point where I was actually told sometimes to quiet down. Like, I'm laughing too loud in the streets. If you laugh too loud in the streets, you're attracting attention. But I would overcompensate. This was after I had left. I was actually no longer in contact with my parents. I was the one who made that decision to cut them off. And I had been talking to my older sister, and I said something about how I used to sit at the Shabbos table, and, it was a very long table. It was a 12-foot table, and I don't know how wide. It was very wide. My father sat at one end, my mother at the other. The boys all sat around the end where my father was. The girls all sat around the end where my mother was. So, even in the family, we were gender segregated. I sat right next to my mother, so I was on the corner. And I was kind of slid out of things. I felt out of it, and I wanted it that way. I didn't want to be with one sibling on one side of me and another sibling on the other. I needed that space. But I said to my sister, I sometimes sat there wondering if I even have a personality or if I'm just blank. There is nothing to me. I felt blank. And my sister was like, what do you mean? Of course you had a personality. And looking back, I'm like, of course I had I had a very big personality. But I didn't see it that way because I was always trying to stuff it down. Anytime that I would say something or do something that expressed myself, there was very often pushback, and I would feel shame for expressing myself that way. It's a sort of a weird thing, right? Where it was very, very strict. In fact, after I left, I heard from a sibling that one of my brothers suggested to my parents that maybe if they had put a better filter on the internet at home, I wouldn't have left, which is laughable. But also, they did get a lot stricter after I left. But I was allowed to watch certain movies. We had a VCR in my parents' closet, and it came out for special occasions on like Hanukkah when everyone was off from school. We would take it out. Everyone would sit on the floor in my parents' room, and we would watch a movie. The movies that we had were Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which was the most scandalous because there's a kiss at the end. There was a knockoff version of Disney's Alice in Wonderland, animated. There was Peter Pan, the Mary Martin stage show. Sometimes we would get VHSs from the public library, which technically in high school, I signed a document in 9th grade saying that I would not go to the public library. I would not go ice skating. My family would not go to Florida for midwinter vacation. Not that we could afford that, but the ice skating in the library, I did those. And it was kind of like, yeah, whatever.
That's so specific. Why not ice skating?
It's immodest because you're skating in mixed company. Your skirt might go up. If you fall, your skirt might really go up. And it doesn't matter if you're wearing leggings or something underneath. If the line of your leg above your knee shows, that's bad.
Okay.
So even if you're covering with thick tights or leggings, that's immodest because then people will see your thighs. And Florida on midwinter vacation was just kind of like, that's a free-for-all and we don't know what you're going to be doing there. So it was just kind of like that. It was like spring break. Don't go on spring break. Of course, they were visiting their grandparents most of the time, but that's a separate story.
Okay, so you signed this document. Sorry, I got you off track.
So one of the things in 12th grade, in our literature class, we read the play 12 Angry Men, right? So we didn't watch it, but we read it. And my father thought that I would enjoy seeing the movie with Henry Fonda, black and white. I was very into 50s movies also. My parents were not so happy with it, but I was very into Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers at one point. All the Fred Astaire movies. I can sing the songs by heart. So my father showed this to me. And again, this is very much not the typical, especially now. I just want to make that clear that I'm saying this. This is not the typical. It was very much an anomaly. And now it's much harder to find even people that are going to do that.
So it's even more strict.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, because then you see what happens to people like me, right? And there's a hemorrhage, according to one rabbi. There's a hemorrhage. We are hemorrhaging teens and, young adults. And so we have to do things to keep them in here. And of course, the thing that they do is to lock the gates even tighter. But that's very counterproductive.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like the way to keep someone in is doubling down and getting more strict.
Yeah.
But anyways, so you're watching movies. You're not supposed to be able to watch movies. And then what?
This is a very long way around to what I'm saying over here, where I felt shut down. So this was at 12th grade Shabbaton. Every year in May, the entire school goes up to the Catskill Mountains to a summer camp that is empty, obviously, because it's not summer. And we're there for a weekend. 12th graders go up a little early because they are the ones who are actually preparing the whole everything. They're in charge of it. So this was like Friday lunch. I was sitting with my group of friends, and we had been friends since pre-1A. So nursery, kindergarten, pre-1A. In pre-1A, some of us got together in classes in nursery, but by the time we were in pre-1A, all the way up through 12th grade, we were a core group of 4. Some girls came and went over the years, but we knew each other since we were toddlers, So I wanted to say something in the conversation. I wanted to say something about 12 Angry Men the movie, not the play that we had read together. So I said, oh, I was watching the movie 12 Angry Men, and my friend said, shh, no, don't talk about movies. No, I was just going to say, and I couldn't even get the words out to say, I'm literally just talking about the play that we actually read in class. She shut me down. Like, shh, don't talk about movies. I cried myself to sleep that night. It seems so silly to even say that now. I cried because my friend said, don't talk about movies. But this was something that mattered to me. Again, it was that intellectual part. It was like, I had this revelation about something. I honestly don't remember what the revelation was. But there was something that I wanted to share. And I was made to feel dirty for having watched a 1950s black and white movie about 12 jurors.
Yeah, you were ashamed.
Yeah.
And I know something that you wanted to talk about specifically within the school system is how they kind of keep you in this bubble. You're not allowed to get creative or ask certain questions. If you do ask questions, you're punished for it. Can you give us a little snapshot of what it was like growing up in these schools, wanting to learn more and not being able to?
Yeah, absolutely. I learned not to ask questions very early on. I learned how to play that balance, but there were moments when I couldn't help myself. And I want to say, on a more positive note, I did have some teachers who answered my questions. They didn't answer them satisfactorily, but they attempted to. And they were sincere in what they were doing. My 10th grade Flemish teacher, she did say, when I asked questions in class, she would say, let's not talk about that now. We can talk after class because this isn't something that the rest of the class needs to hear. Which is that kind of thing of like, okay, just because I'm the only one asking the question doesn't mean that no one else thinks this question.
Yeah.
But also, why not? Why shouldn't they? You don't want to hear too much, but since you raised it, I'll talk to you. I didn't really get in trouble. I wasn't punished in that sense. There were girls who were punished for what they asked. It was kind of oblique, I suppose. This was in 11th grade. It was a class on Mishle, Proverbs, the book of Proverbs. The way this teacher ran things was she scheduled a test for whatever, every 2 months, every 2 weeks. I don't remember exactly what the schedule was. She would go verse by verse. She would read out the verse, translate it into English, tell us about any commentaries on the verse, what they said, expound on it for philosophical, inspirational improvement, which is essentially what all our classes were about. And then she would move on to the next verse. And however many verses we covered by the time the test was scheduled, that's what was on the test. So, of course, students wanted her to go slower. Girls would ask questions to slow her down. Because if you ask her a question and she takes the time to explain it, it takes longer before she goes on to the next verse. And I was very good at coming up with questions. Now, I wasn't paying attention in this class. My group of friends, they were like some of the best students in the grade in terms of what the faculty wanted a good Beit Yaakov girl to look like. But they had their ways of sneaking under the radar and they would have conversations with each other, but they were actually paying attention. I wasn't. I was daydreaming. I was doing whatever I wanted. So every so often, a classmate would turn to me and say, hey, ask a question. She's going too fast. So I would tune in, listen to what she was saying, and ask a question based on the last thing she said. So a funny bit was she was talking about a woman of valor, and she got to the verse, Vatakam ba'od laila vatiten terev levesa, which is, I don't know how it appears in the King James, but it's she gets up while it's still nighttime, and she prepares food for her family. And so the teacher was expounding on this and saying that this means that a good Jewish wife and mother gets up early in the morning in order to make a hot breakfast for her children, specifically for her sons, so that they can go and have a good day of learning Torah, so that they're fully nourished. She doesn't serve them cold cereal because that's not nourishing. I was called upon to ask a question, so I raised my hand and said, I don't know, my mother served us cold cereal. That's what we had for breakfast every day, and I'm fine. It's the dumbest thing to ask, but she talked about that. She went on and on about it for a little bit. Goal accomplished. We slowed her down. Another one that was not as funny and not as innocent, talking about movies and videos. I don't remember what the verse was at this point. I don't remember what the context was. But again, I was called upon to ask a question to slow her down. And she was talking about how videos are terrible. You know, what you see has a really big impact on your soul. And so if you're watching these things, it's terrible. So I raised my hand and said, but what about classical movies? Now, at this time, I was mixing up classic and classical, which is important for later in the story. I meant classic. Right? I meant classic movies like A Little Princess or Peter Pan or Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which is what we watched at home. Not that I would let anyone know about that, but that's what was in my head. She thought I meant Shakespeare because we did read Shakespeare. It was mandated by the state, so we read one Shakespeare play per year. There was no unit on Shakespeare. It was just Julius Caesar in 9th grade, Macbeth in 11th grade. I don't remember what the others were. Hamlet in 12th, I think. I don't know. But some girls did not want to read the plays, and so they would rent a movie, watch that. So she thought I meant that because it was quite well known that girls were doing that. I didn't, as it happens to be. I read the plays. I don't know what her answer was. Honestly, I don't know. Not too long after that, there was an assembly, a grade-wide assembly. So it was everyone in the 11th grade, all the classes. And we were in classes. We didn't move from class to class. We stayed in a room and the teachers came to us. It's a minor detail, but kind of. So we all went down. I think it was like the first of the Jewish month. I'm not entirely sure what the reason for the assembly was. But during that assembly, the principal, who was extremely well liked of all the principals that we've had, and there were several because there's high turnover, she was one of the better ones. And yet she said this. She was talking about a lot of things. Again, this was all just like very inspirational, how to better your soul. And she got onto the topic of movies and how you should not watch videos. And then she said, even if they're like classical movies, in that sort of tone where it was very clear that she was quoting someone. It was also very clear to all of my classmates that she was quoting me.
Yeah.
So again, I didn't get in trouble. I wasn't called out for it or anything, but it was a wake-up call to me. Be more careful. Because I don't know if the principal got my name. Like, the teacher must have said something, or it's possible that one of my classmates said something, because it is quite well known that there are spies who basically inform the principals of what their fellow classmates are doing. So it may have been one of my classmates. I'm pretty sure it was the teacher, actually, who said something. I don't know if she used my name when she was telling the story. Honestly, I don't know if she ever knew my name. She didn't know anyone's names. So whatever, it's fine. But it was a bit of like, this is what happens. I had been careful and I had slipped. I had let my guard down and I had asked the question that I knew would get me in trouble. And thankfully, because the teacher didn't know my name, I didn't get in trouble, but it was like I could. And the trouble that I would get into, I mean, that was a really silly question, but there were certain questions that I asked, like my 10th grade teacher who didn't want to answer the questions. I think we were learning the book of Exodus at that point. She didn't want to answer my question in class. That was actually a question that if this teacher had not been the kind of open, sincere, genuine person that she was, could have gotten me in trouble. Because I was questioning, I don't remember what the question was, but I do remember that it was something about core beliefs. You know, I was saying, okay, so if the text says such and such, that contradicts what we're told to believe about XYZ. So how do you reconcile that? Those kinds of questions can get you branded an at-risk teen. Even the movies could get you branded an at-risk teen. And there are organizations that deal with at-risk teens, and they lump together teens who are on drugs and teens who are using their phone on Shabbat. Are equal because they can both take you out of Orthodox observance, and so it doesn't matter.
Wow.
Like what it is. Your soul or your body, either one, you're at risk.
I think I want to point out quickly, because that's a really important point that you just talked about, which is when you lump those things together, I think what can happen is if somebody has a minor infraction or is slightly worldly or watches a movie, and then they hear that type of rhetoric of you're just as bad as someone who does drugs, it could easily make them go, well, I've already failed, so I may as well just go do drugs.
Yep.
And not really having a good distinction of one does not equal the other. There are clear variances in the middle there. And I feel like that can cause a lot of people to just, I mean, I've had similar reactions within Mormonism of, well, I did that. I made out with a bunch of boys. I'm a whore. Now what? Like, oh, well, I guess I can just do whatever. It's like, no, you can still have boundaries and you can still have a healthy way of going about things, or you can still revert if you want to. You don't have to just jump to the worst possible thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's really dangerous.
There was this, I believe it was a poem that someone wrote. It's actually in this book. So this is the book that I edited. One of the chapters in that book, it's co-written by people who wrote a zine in high school. And this was extremely rebellious. It was critical thinking. They did get in trouble for it. But one of the things that they were writing there was, okay, Oreos. At one point, Oreos did not have a stamp of approval that they were kosher, right? So if you're going to say Oreos that are not kosher are just as bad as cocaine, then if I eat an Oreo, what's to stop me from going and doing cocaine?
Right.
Anyway, it's that sort of thing. It's exactly that. And I mean, they were talking about that in high school, and like kudos to them for thinking about that. But yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah. Know? So before we move into your experience over in Israel, I know that part of your advocacy work in the past was trying to better these all-girl schools. And so I really want to make sure we get to the core of what you think they could have done differently, or ways you feel like it failed you, and ways that you really wanted to make it better for future children.
Yeah. First of all, the emphasis on modesty is terrible. So that was one of the things that we talked about when we were meeting with people. Don't reduce them to their bodies, like their minds are there too.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a really unhealthy relationship, because your teachers are not just your teachers of the subject. It's like, you know, that saying of like, I don't teach a subject, I teach students, which is an admirable thing. It's taken to such an extreme where teachers get inappropriately close to students. They become their close mentors, and that is lauded as amazing. It's like, oh, this teacher, she was so great to me. She saw me when I was struggling. I went over to her for Friday night, Shabbat dinner, and like I became part of her family. And no, actually, no, that's not okay. There are laws in place about what a teacher can and cannot do with their student for a reason.
Right.
And maybe it is possible that those things are not covered by the laws. I don't actually know that much about those laws, but there's this sense of you're judged morally. You're not really judged academically. Yes, your academics are important, but they are a reflection of your morality.
Oh.
Your popularity is also a reflection of your morality, depending on which group you're part of. In high school, girls get jobs, especially in 11th and 12th grade. You get yearbook jobs. Every girl in 12th grade has a job. You're working on the Purim gathering or the Hanukkah gathering. You're working on play in various aspects. You're the head of the school-wide Shabbaton, various things. Not everyone gets a job in 9th and 10th and 11th grade. Some do. But we called it recycling because the faculty, the principals, and the teachers who were in charge of things would identify the girls that they thought were really good, and they were their favorites, and they would give them jobs over and over again. Everyone else, whatever. You're just kind of like, you could be invisible. You could really want something and it doesn't matter because the principal and teachers have already decided who is the best girl in the grade, and they're going to keep raising her up, and everyone else can just...
So
whatever. Favoritism. So going back to what I had said a little bit at the beginning, where the boys' secular studies, they really mocked their teachers. Their teachers, they couldn't keep teachers for more than 2 years at a time because they will quit. These were teachers who were coming to this job after teaching in public school, or some of them may have been Orthodox, and so they were coming here to teach. It didn't matter. They were never on the same religious level as the boys. So the boys looked down on them because you're not as good as us. Some of them were not Jewish, and so they really looked down on them. The stories that I heard from my brothers were ridiculous. That wasn't the case in the girls' schools, partly because the teachers who were teaching secular studies were actually women from the community. But there was very much this idea that if you are, I was told this explicitly. When I was in 11th grade or so, I was always a straight A student. And around 11th grade, I really stopped caring about Jewish studies. I was like, this is nonsense. I can learn this better on my own. And so I didn't put in effort. I didn't study. And I was still getting 85s. Perfectly acceptable, except that I had always been a straight A student, and I was still getting A's, 95 and up in my secular studies. And so I was told that I had my priorities wrong, that I needed to stop focusing so much on secular studies, and I needed to put more effort towards my Judaic studies.
Mm-hmm.
That, along with, the quashing of any intellectual curiosity, if you ask a question in the wrong way, that can get you marked as, okay, this is one to watch, because not for a good reason, right? For like, we have to make sure that she sticks to the straight and narrow. It doesn't give most girls, it's not, I don't even want to say self-actualization or pride. It's just a sense of self. You are not a person if you don't conform to everything. Part of the thing that went wrong with the advocacy that I was part of was that we didn't have a very clear idea of what we wanted to do, of what we want to accomplish, because all of this is very vague. All of these things that I'm talking about they're in the feel of things. They're in the spirit. They're not necessarily in, okay, you need more hours of secular studies. That's a very concrete thing. Here we're talking more about an attitude, and we couldn't convey that to the people we were talking to well enough. That's one of the reasons why it didn't work out. That's one of the lesser reasons why it didn't work out. It was other stuff. But it's that attitude towards this of, it's not a school. I always called seminary, which is the year after 12th grade. A lot of girls go to Israel for seminary. I actually went to Cleveland, Yavneh Seminary, which is known for its text-based intellectual study. But I always refer to seminary as like a Jewish girl's finishing school, and finishing school in the sense of like, Victorian finishing school, where you learn manners. You learn how to be a good wife. You learn how to be a good mother. But actually, that's going on since preschool. The entire thing is about being a good mother and being a good wife. And they will say, there are some who will say that, no, of course, we want you to continue learning. And there's this idea of, well, you're going to go to seminary to learn how to learn, so that when you have your babies and you can open up a sefer, a holy book of like commentary, that you can read some inspirational things on your own. You'll be able to take that with you for the rest of your life. That, first of all, that's like in between taking care of babies, you'll be able to do that. There's no option for anything other than that. And you're judged on your ability by the time you're in like 7th grade. From then, you're judged on how prepared you are to be a mother.
Mm-hmm.
It's fine if the community values family and says, yes, every girl should, dream of being a mother. But if that's the only thing and nothing else is given any outlet. Now, there is one thing that's given outlet in high school, that's creativity. So I was noticing when you asked me before about, creativity and certain questions, intellectual questions are a no, but creativity in the sense of writing songs, creating dances that will only be performed for women. I wrote, and so I contributed to some of the publications. That was good, as long as, this is something my mother said to me after I left also, as long as you're using those talents to serve God, to give back to God, to serve the community. So you're allowed to be creative in service of God.
Limits. Right. I'm finding this a little contradictory because so we're talking about how your goal as a young child is to, according to them, become a wife and a mother, and you're being trained as early as you can remember. And at the same time, you had told me that your parents said, okay, go to college so that you can pay for your husband to study, but then they're not really nourishing those ambitions in school, and they're telling you, no, be more religious, but okay, find a good job so that you can also be the breadwinner and take care of the children. That's just, it feels very contradictory.
So first of all, yes, it is contradictory. The idea that the woman has to be the homemaker and the breadwinner. First of all, that's a change. Again, going back to like what I read about the history of how this community has changed, that's a big change. That's over the past 40 years or so that men all learn. It didn't used to be that way. It used to be that the men went out to work. It was very much typical American middle-class family. The wife is staying at home with the kids and the husband or father is going out to work. But I think one of the key differences here is what you're studying in college.
Yeah.
I did not go to college immediately after high school or even seminary. I started teaching. I taught for 2 years in my own elementary school. I taught 8th grade English language arts, but I wanted to go to college. It's a long story of why I didn't in the first place, but halfway through my second year teaching, I was like, I am going out of my mind. I am so not stimulated intellectually.
This is something that they pushed you to do, right? They told you that you needed to be a teacher. You didn't choose this path.
Well, it was one of the only things open to us. Several of my fellow teachers who were the same age as me, they treated teaching as a sort of waiting period, right? This is when you're dating, you're hoping to get engaged very soon. As soon as you get engaged, you're going to move to wherever your husband is, most likely Lakewood, New Jersey, because that's where the biggest yeshiva for married men is. And then you stop teaching. So teaching was just, while you're waiting, you teach. Now, that's not to say that everyone was like that, because some teachers really, really cared about it. There's this sort of expectation, since women are supposed to be the child raisers, right? The child rearers. It's implicit, but it's also explicitly stated, especially around Passover time, that the woman is just naturally a teacher. Because you are created to bear and raise children, you are naturally a teacher. So you don't need training. It was one of the few things open to us. It was like, it's a high calling. You're going to teach the next generation of Jewish children. That's kind of, it's both inherent in you as a woman, and it's also a calling. Not everyone did become a teacher. A lot of girls who did not go to college just got office jobs as receptionists or, data entry or whatever it is. I mean, that's fine. That's great. A lot of them were also kind of in a waiting period, but many of them also continued with that afterwards. Another option, and this was basically when there is a specific need in the market, a lot of girls are pursuing that. So in my years, right, in my year and a few before and after, it was speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and special education. There was a need for women doing that job in the community. This was also around the time, as I learned later, this was around the time when certain government things changed in New York. And the reason that there was a need was because the schools could use vouchers and get the money to pay from the government. But that's a whole separate story. There is an article in the New York Times about that. You can go read that. When I said I wanted to go to college, I wanted to major in English literature. I wanted to study medieval British literature. And I'm not sure where that came from exactly. I have my theories of why I wanted that. I read A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court when I was like 10 years old. I read Adam of the Road, which is medieval historical fiction. When I was in 12th grade, we read part of Beowulf and the Canterbury Tales because it was required by the state. But when I tried to use that for my practice state exam, my teacher said, don't try to do that. We didn't learn enough about it for you to understand it enough. And I was like, why not? Teach me more about it then. So I point to those things. But I wanted to study English literature, and that's not a practical thing, right? That's not, even without the religious background, this is something that's a big discussion in college, right? You're majoring in English literature or literature in general. What are you going to do with that, right? That doesn't lead to a job. My father wanted me to not major in English literature and to instead pursue a degree in speech therapy, PT, or OT. Not so much special education. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I will be miserable if I work in those jobs. The thing is that that's not really a consideration that you're supposed to be making. You're not supposed to worry about whether you'll be happy in the job. You're supposed to think about, will this job help me support my family?
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not your husband is going to be studying Torah all day, you still have to support your family. I mean, if you're going to have 9 kids, you need a dual income. You kind of do, unless someone is making, 6 figures. So yeah, that was kind of the reason that they encouraged me to go to college, was so that I could set myself up for a career that would earn me a good income.
Mm-hmm.
I did not do that. They were okay with me getting a degree in English literature. Again, I think this is slightly different between my parents, because my mother at that point was still proud of me for my intellectual curiosity. I think in some ways she saw me as pursuing something that she had to drop out of, right? She couldn't finish her PhD. My father was much more pragmatic about it. But the thing is that where I was teaching, right, in the 8th grade, Beis Yaakov in the 8th grade, I would get a bump in my paycheck if I had a VA. I don't know why exactly. That was kind of like, okay, it's okay if you're getting a degree in English literature because you're going to continue teaching. And when I quit after my first semester in college, when I quit teaching, that was like, okay, hang on a second, what's going on here?
Yeah.
There were many conversations throughout the rest of my college years where my mother was saying, you only have one foot in the frum world, and frum is, in this sense, meaning charity. It means different things depending on who's using it. But you have one foot in the frum world, and you really need to have both feet here. You can't have one foot in the other world. So maybe get an afternoon job as a secretary in yeshiva until you graduate, and then you can go back to teaching. And at that point, I knew I was not going back to teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not in Beis Yaakov. And so I was like, no.
Let's talk about when you decided to double down, because you were like, okay, I need to figure out my faith. I need to go head in. I need to go to Israel, take these classes. And I would love to focus in on how you took these beginner classes from people or with people who were not familiar with the religion, so that you could ask the questions that you would otherwise get in trouble for in a more advanced class.
Yeah. Neve Yerushalayim is the name of the seminary. Yerushalayim is Jerusalem. It's in Jerusalem. And it is specifically a seminary for Baalei Tshuva, which means people who grew up without Orthodox religion. They could have grown up with another form of Judaism, but it doesn't matter because that doesn't count. But they're coming closer to Orthodox Judaism. And so they come here to be inspired, to learn about things, to be in an environment where they're beginning to keep kosher and modesty laws and all of that. It's specifically for women. But they also run a summer program that is for, as they say, Beis Yaakov graduates. So girls who graduated from Ultra Orthodox schools. I had actually planned to go with one of my friends, but she got engaged before the summer, and so she was not going to go. But I was going to go anyway. And in a way, I was kind of glad that I wasn't going with her, because this was the summer after college. 2012, I had graduated from college, have my bachelor's. I was taking a year off. I knew I wanted to go to grad school, but I was taking a year off on the advice of one of my professors to see if I really wanted to do graduate school. And I knew that I had been slipping. There were things that I had done. And again, you know how I said I lied to myself? I lied to myself about certain beliefs that I had or didn't have. I also managed to lie to myself about things that I was doing, transgressions, and kind of convince myself that it was sort of okay.
The loopholes.
The loopholes. Yes, the loopholes that then get you. So there was a Dunkin' Donuts on my way from the train station to college, and I would sometimes get a coffee. I wanted a donut. Some Dunkin' Donuts are kosher. They have the kosher stamp, and so they don't serve any bacon or sausage. They don't serve any meat at all. Actually, they'll serve only things that have the kosher stamp on them. It's like certified that the whatever they're baking and cooking in or whatever, that's all kosher. If a store doesn't have that certification, you can't eat anything there. You can. Some say you can have the coffee, because nothing goes into that coffee pot except coffee. But you can't have a latte because they'll be using the thing to mix. You don't know what they're mixing. You can't use the syrups because you know what's in the syrups. That's Starbucks, actually. But I wanted a donut. And so I asked the poor guy behind the counter. I feel so bad for him. I asked him if the donuts are kosher. And he's like, what is that? What does that mean? This was not in a Jewish neighborhood at all. So I was like, well, is there a kosher symbol on the box? When the donuts come in, are they kosher? And he's like, I don't know. Let me go look. He goes and looks at the box. He brings the box out to the front. And he's like, I don't know what I'm looking for. There was nothing on it. There was no kosher symbol on it. I was just like, okay, that day, I don't think I got something that day. But then another time I was like, you know what? Look, these things are delivered. These are the same donuts that are served in the stores that are kosher. There's no way. Like, I won't get a toasted bagel, but I'll get a donut. And so I started doing that. And I was like, it's fine. And then eventually there was one time where I wanted a bagel. So I saw that the little things of tuna that they have, they no longer have this, but they used to have like a little thing of tuna that you would open, smear it on bagel. And I saw that did have a kosher symbol. So I was like, fine, I'll get a bagel with tuna. Again, the bagel is delivered. It's the same ingredients that they serve at the kosher thing. All rationalizing. Until the point when I decided, well, I didn't decide this. This was an interesting moment. I had ordered a tuna sandwich. They had accidentally given me a chicken sandwich. And so chicken salad instead of tuna salad. And I didn't notice it. This was on my way home, actually. So I didn't notice it until I was waiting for the train. I was on the platform and I was so hungry. It was really late at night. I had a really late class that semester. And I was just hungry. I was like, what? I don't care. And I ate it. That was a moment. But I mean, other things also, like I started listening to music on Shabbos because my house got extremely loud and I could not deal with it. And a lot of the time it was also, I mean, the boys drink on Shabbos. Underage, sure, whatever. Some of them don't know when to stop. And so 2 of my brothers would always be drunk Saturday afternoon. And they would be arguing and it was just really, really horrible to listen to. And so I was just like, I'm putting on my headphones.
Yeah.
And yet somehow I still managed to convince myself that I was not breaking Shabbos. I don't know how, because that is absolutely breaking Shabbos.
Can I just say, Dainy, your rebellion is so wholesome.
Oh my God.
I know that there are real rules and I get it because we had stupid rules like that, like coffee and even just going into Starbucks. I felt like a total sinner. But at the end of the day, it's a donut. You know what I mean? And the stuff that we place so much high value on. And that's not to say you can't have a diet. That's not to say, if you choose not to eat something, then that's fine. Everyone do what makes you feel comfortable. My point is putting such shame and heavy implications on something so simple that's not hurting anybody. That's where it hurts me a little inside, that you probably felt so guilty for doing those things.
Yes. And I'm going to say one more thing about that, and it's a good segue into what happened when I was in Israel. So I'm just laughing at my rebellion is wholesome. One of the ways I rebelled was listening to the radio. I had on my Walkman, I had a little radio thing. And so I would listen to the radio. It was very thrilling to be in the house where everyone is, doing the righteous thing, depending on how you define righteous. But I would be listening to the radio. I listened to Kelly Clarkson and Miley Cyrus. I got laughed at in my music class when on the first day of class, everyone was going around saying what they were listening to on the train that morning. And I said, Miley Cyrus and Selena Gomez, and the entire class laughed at me, and I didn't know why. But I worked in the writing center. I was a peer tutor, and I made some really good friends there. Unfortunately, I was still in the mindset of I'm so different from everyone that I never acknowledged that they were actually my friends, and I regret that to this day.
Mm.
We were talking about, what music we listened to at one point, and I said something about, I don't remember how I said it, but it was like, I'm rebelling and listening to music. My parents would freak if they knew this. And so one of my workmates asked me what I was listening to, and I told her, and she burst out laughing, not in mockery the way my class did, but in the sense that this was rebellious. And she was like, I thought you were going to say you were listening to like punk rock or heavy metal or whatever. And she's like, my rebellion in my teenage years was whatever artist she said, I don't remember. And I was like, yeah, no, I would. I'm listening to Kelly Clarkson singing Breakaway. That was my anthem.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a lot of shame around that. And that is actually one of the things that I discussed with a rabbi in Israel. So I was there in the summer. I get there, we're having various classes with various teachers. My idea going into this was I need to find something to convince me that it's worth staying in this, because the idea of leaving is terrifying.
Yeah.
So please, please, please give me a reason to stay. And this was not about I mean, there's a narrative of that, everyone who leaves, either they were abused or they're on drugs or they're just sex crazy, right? They have temptations that they can't, that's why they're leaving. Or they were abused and that's why they're blaming everything on Judaism and they're throwing out the baby with the bathwater, whatever. But I was struggling intellectually. I was thinking, look, all the things that they told me about the outside world, I went to college and saw it wasn't true. I was in college. I went to City College of New York, so in Harlem, right? Very diverse student population. For the first time, I saw that everything they said about, my community is extremely racist. My mother actually said at one point that, of course, we're racist. We're the chosen people. So we're racist.
Wow. That's as blunt as it gets.
Yes. You can't be truly religious. You can't be actually firm in your faith if you embrace religious tolerance. Because if you're tolerating other religions, then you're not. Anyway, that's a whole separate thing. Honestly, when I heard that, I was like, that's a Christian thing about proselytizing to the non-believers. That's not a Jewish thing. Jews don't proselytize to outsiders. Anyway, but yeah, I was sitting in these classes and it was just the same tired old arguments that I'd heard over and over again, meant to be inspirational, not meant to make you think, not assuming that you're thinking. It just assumed that everyone had the foundation. So I went to the rabbi who was in charge of the program. I set up an appointment with him. I went to his house. I was alone with him, but his wife was coming home at any minute. Little callback.
Yeah.
And I told him I wasn't really getting answers. I'm like, there are questions that I want to ask in this class, but everyone else in the class accepts these as a given. And so if I ask a question, everyone will look at me like I'm crazy. He first said, we try to make it clear that this was for Beis Yaakov graduates. And I said, hi, I did graduate from Beis Yaakov, but I still don't have answers to the basic questions because you assume that we just got them growing up, but we never did.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about this and I don't have answers. One of the things I said to him, this was the first time I ever said it out loud. I said, I feel like we're living a game of Candyland. We're pieces on a board, right? We're moving along and there are chutes. Oh, sorry. Candyland and chutes and ladders are two different things. But Candyland.
My two favorite games growing up.
But so in Candyland, right? If you get stuck in the swamps, you are stuck there for a bit, right? So that's punishment. If you get to the, candies places, you get some reward and you're moving along, follow the rules and you'll get rewarded or punished. And then you make it to the end and you're the winner, right? So I'm one of the pieces, but I didn't ask to be one of the pieces. I didn't ask to play this game. What if I say, I don't want the reward, I don't want the punishment, I don't want any of it, I don't want to play? Why do I not get to make that choice? He didn't give me an answer to that. He did say, I could answer you, but there's someone who could give you a better answer. And he sent me to someone else. But the music thing, right? The shame. I said, I listen to non-Jewish music. And I feel really guilty about it. And he was like, why with the guilt? Why does everyone make you feel guilty about it? Look, as long as it's not pornographic, listen to whatever you want. It's fine.
Whoa.
Never heard that from a rabbi before. Never. But because he is in a seminary for women who are coming to Orthodoxy, a little more leniency. I don't know if it's that or also I think he was British. And so there's slight differences there, although British Haredi can be even more intense than American in some ways. That happened. He did also send me to a modern Orthodox woman who has a PhD and has studied Talmud and has written books about it. And I would say her name, but I don't know if that's right to her. And I went to her. I remember sitting on the bus going there, and it was like I didn't tell anyone, any of the other girls in the program, and it was like this was just me. It's just something that I was doing. It was a very interesting visit. I spoke to her about. I don't think I actually spoke to her about that Candyland. I didn't choose to play a thing, but what I did say was, everything about me is God-given, right? So if everything about me is God-given, and God gave me this intellect and this curiosity, and I was actually in the process of applying to a study abroad program to do a master's in Arthurian legend in Wales.
Awesome.
I didn't get the scholarship, so I couldn't go.
Man,
but I did apply.
But that sounds awesome.
It would have been. So I said, right, so this drive, God gave me this. So what's wrong with it? And she, again, her response was kind of like the rabbis. She said, there's nothing wrong with it. As long as you're not studying anything that's anti-Torah, it's fine. And the rabbi had said something similar. I'm pretty sure that he meant queer studies. But I was like, oh, yeah, no, my mentor wanted me to study convents. I won't do that. Because, that's Christian. That's not Jewish. That's not what he meant. That's not what she meant either. She was like, there's nothing wrong with it. Since you are a Torah observant Jew, everything you do is what a Torah observant Jew does, which is very much a tautology and doesn't entirely make sense. She's also the first person in my life to call me attractive. And it was couched as a warning. She said, you're going to go to grad school. There's going to be guys there. You're a very attractive girl. They're going to want to hang out with you. Be careful.
Yeah.
I was like, okay. The first time in my life I was called attractive, and it was by someone warning me to stay away from guys. I did go to some of the beginner classes. I didn't actually ask any questions in them because I was just kind of sitting there. It was interesting. I enjoyed hearing about the way that it was presented to women who did not grow up with it. I came back home. I was still in shidduchim, which is the marriage market, essentially.
How old were you?
I was 23.
Oh, right.
I mean, one of the things that was really hard on me was that I didn't get a lot of dates. The matchmaker, the shadchan, would suggest boys to my mother. She would do the research. We would say, sure, this sounds good. And then the boys would say no, or like it wouldn't even get that far. And I started dating when I was 21, a little late because my older sister was still single. So I was waiting for her. I went out from 21 till 25. I went out with 3 guys total. And I thought there was something wrong with me. I'm not desirable. Nobody wants me. In retrospect, so grateful that I didn't get married because I know how hard it is to leave once you get married.
Right.
And have kids. Like, no, I'm glad no one wanted me. But I got back. I had a year off before grad school. Again, was kind of going crazy, not having intellectual stimulation. Signed up for one course at Fordham. Great. It was fantastic. It was a graduate course. I started grad school at the CUNY Graduate Center, fall of 2013. My mental health was all over the place. I was extremely depressed. But then I decided I was like, at the end of this semester, I'm moving out of my parents' house. And I had discussed this with my parents at several points, actually. I had known several older singles who were 30 years old and still living with their parents. And I said to my parents when I was 21, I said, there is going to come a point, if I'm not married, I'm moving out. I'm not going to stay here forever. And my parents' response was, let's cross that bridge when we get to it. You'll be married before then. Don't worry. I wasn't.
And then you got to the bridge.
I got to the bridge. I crossed it. Now, I moved out. I moved into an apartment with modern Orthodox girls. And at that point, I had been exploring modern Orthodoxy because it was very clear that I was not staying in Haredi Orthodoxy, in Ultra Orthodoxy. That wasn't happening. And my parents were not too excited about it, but they allowed me to explore modern Orthodoxy as long as I stayed on the right-wing side of it. That was made explicit to me. So I moved into this apartment with modern Orthodox girls in actually January 1st, 2014 was my move out date. I very quickly realized that the only reason I had actually still been keeping anything was because I was at home and I didn't want to make waves and I didn't want to hurt my parents. So I stopped. Once I was not in the environment, and the girls in that apartment were totally like, do whatever you want. We don't care. At one point I had been hiding that I was taking the bus on Shabbos and going to meet with some grad school friends to work on our papers. And my roommate caught me sneaking in and she was like, why are you sneaking? And I'm like, because I'm breaking Shabbos. She's like, I don't care. Do what you want, which was very freeing. That was it. That was the end, And that was literally a year and a half after I had gone to Israel. I didn't get answers. I did attempt to get more answers when I got back. And nothing. And I saw that there were no answers. And if there were, they were such mental gymnastics to make things fit.
Yeah.
That I couldn't deal with it.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. It feels like critical thinking and academia were really the nail in the coffin because you couldn't critically think your way into continuing believing something that didn't make sense to you. And maybe it makes sense to other people and maybe they find happiness enjoying it. But for you, it feels like, from my perspective, it feels like it was keeping you in this box and you were so desperately wanting to get out and explore, not even all of the quote simple things or eating all the bagels, the non-kosher bagels, but just exploring without boundaries. And so, right, I think for you, it makes total sense that you just wanted that freedom to be yourself, to be authentic.
Yeah. And I'm laughing at critical thinking because there was an article in one of the Jewish magazines a couple years ago that just came out and said, we are against critical thinking. We don't need critical thinking.
Really?
We don't want to encourage critical thinking in our children.
Ah.
I think about that sometimes and I'm just like, that really just encapsulates everything about it. It's we don't want you to think.
Yeah.
And I mean, related to that, again, my mother grew up as a critical thinker, right? She is extremely intelligent because she was conforming to things, because in some ways she found her, again, this is me psychoanalyzing her, but because she found validation from the community where she could give lectures on Torah topics, she doubled down and doubled down and doubled down. One of the things when I left, when I said I was exploring philosophy of various kinds, she said, why go out there and read what others have said before you've read all of the things that the Jewish philosophers and Jewish thinkers have said? Why go there when you can get it from us? And I'm like, but I don't think that just because I was born into a Jewish family, that means that I should go to Judaism first in order to make sense of the world.
Yeah, you wanted a broader perspective, a broader scope of things in the world. And that makes complete sense. And I don't think anyone should blame you for that. But it's just so interesting how, like you were saying in the beginning, things are getting tighter and tighter and the grip is becoming stronger. And they're trying to turn off people's critical thinking because they realize that that's why they're leaving. They're learning things from the outside world or becoming too, quote, worldly. And that is affecting their membership. And unfortunately, getting a tighter grip on the youth is only going to make them pull away more. And we're about out of time, but I want to know how you're doing now. What makes you happy? What brings you peace and joy? All of the above.
So I am currently working as a Hebraica library specialist. Never thought that would happen, but I'm working with Hebrew books all day. That gives me some fulfillment. But what makes me happy is long walks in nature. I do bullet journaling and hook rug and calm music. I really embrace the kind of quiet, slow life. Still working towards getting there.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. I like that. And any trips to Wales coming soon?
So I actually have been to Scotland several times. Scotland is
cool.
Gorgeous. The Highlands of Scotland, love it.
Right. That's awesome. Well, we're going to Mexico if you want to come to Mexico with us.
I have to travel a bit sometimes.
Yeah, our next trip, we went to Costa Rica with some of our audience and it was awesome. And we're going to Mexico next in March. So if you want to come, it's going to be pretty awesome. But all jokes aside, that's not a joke, I'm totally serious. This has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed hearing your story and I appreciate your perspectives. We need our Linda Listen moment, sassy statement as of our video with the toddler goes, or something to someone who has pissed you off. Either one.
So I was thinking about this and I decided I'm not going to talk to the people who pissed me off because they don't listen anymore. But to others, listen, you don't have to save everybody. You can't anyway. And even though you're seeing everyone who's doing this advocacy and, those are the people you see because the people who are not doing the advocacy, they're living their private, quiet lives and you're allowed to do that.
Yeah.
You don't have to, your life after does not have to be predicated on your life before. You don't have to choose a career that's related to that, that's grappling with it. You can just be happy. You're allowed to take care of yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And especially one to make on this channel because we do have a lot of advocates come on and share and talk about the work they're doing now because of their past. But that doesn't have to be everybody's story. You can just live your life, have nothing to do with the group you came from and not even give it a second thought. And that's okay too. Any journey that feels right to you is the journey that you should do. So That's great. Great advice. Any other final thoughts before we go?
I don't think so. Just sorry that I go on so many tangents.
Tangents are great. We love tangents because it colors your world a little bit more and helps us see things that you went through. Because I don't know what I don't know, and I can't ask questions about things that I don't know happened. So I think tangents are great.
That's a great way of putting it. Yes.
Well, thank you again. This has been awesome. Everyone leave those words of encouragement down below for Dainy. It means a lot that they're willing to come on and share. And if you want to go to Mexico, that was serious. We just launched the trip. Check out the link in our description for the full itinerary. It's happening in March. We're very excited. And we also have a clips channel. If you want things that are a little bit shorter in duration, about 8 to 10 minutes, we pull from previous episodes. So maybe some things that you've missed. That link is in the description at Cults to Consciousness Clips. And we have some merch at cultstoconsciousness.com under the merch tab. And I think that's it. If you like this video, I'll link 2 more down here below. We have some incredible videos with other former Ultra Orthodox people. So until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.